Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. I know it's a late evening, the first day of the second week, so a busy day for everyone. My name's Ashley Allen, and I'm with the Council on Environmental Quality with the White House for the U.S. government. I'll be your MC for today. And I want to welcome you all to the U.S. Center. We are very happy to have this public space to have these discussions outside of the negotiations. Also, welcome to our online audience. Thank you for joining us all over the world. And be sure, if you have any questions today, to hashtag AskUSCenter. Okay, to start off for our event this evening, and the event is Weathering the Storm, Building Business Resilience to Climate Change. So we're bringing in some private sector perspectives here. But we are honored to have with us today Chair Nancy Sutley from the Council on Environmental Quality, and she serves as the Principal Environmental Policy Advisor to the President and helps to develop and coordinate the administration's environmental and energy policies and initiatives. So I'd like to welcome Nancy up to the stage.
Ooh, now we feel tall. Thank you, Ashley, and welcome to all of you. It's great to see you all here, and special welcome to our panel for what promises to be a very interesting discussion. And I'm glad to join these senior executives from companies that are showing really great leadership in tackling the challenges that are presented by climate change. Like many businesses around the world, the Obama administration believes that we can take important, steady, smart steps to protect our communities and our economy from the impacts of climate change. And we can embrace new opportunities in the areas of clean energy and energy efficiency. And climate change is, it's an environmental issue, but it's also an economic issue, and it's a security issue. As the climate changes, we can expect extreme weather events like floods and storms and wildfires and heat waves to grow more frequent and more severe, as well as the economic costs and the health impacts associated with them. In the case of the United States, in 2012 alone, the cost of weather disasters exceeded $110 billion. So this June, President Obama put forth a comprehensive plan for the United States to reduce carbon pollution, to prepare us for the climate impacts we can't avoid, and to be leading with our international partners to combat global climate change. So this plan reflects, I think, historic progress that we've made over the last 4.5 years to curb pollution, to support healthy communities, and to ensure that the United States is playing its role as a leader across the world in clean energy. We've made unprecedented investments in clean energy and have met a goal that the President set in 2008, which was to double the renewable energy we generate from wind and solar in the U.S. We've made significant gains in reducing pollution through energy efficiency. For example, with the support of the auto industry, we've put in place the toughest fuel economy standards for vehicles in U.S. history. By 2025, these standards will mean that we'll be able to double the distance that cars can go on a gallon of gas. That'll save drivers money at the gas pump and cut carbon pollution from our cars in half. The Department of Energy has established a number of new minimum efficiency standards for a variety of consumer products like dishwashers and refrigerators, and taken all together, by 2030, these standards will cut consumer electricity bills by hundreds of billions of dollars and save enough electricity to power more than 85 million homes for 2 years. And building partnerships across sectors has been a key focus of our efforts. For example, to address the opportunities in the commercial building sector, in 2011, we launched the President's Better Buildings Challenge with the goal of reducing energy use in commercial buildings by 20% by the year 2020. And we have more than 100 CEOs, mayors, and leaders of large institutions who have committed more than $2 billion to retrofitting commercial building space in the U.S. We know we have to do more, and moving forward, the President's Climate Action Plan includes a series of steps to address climate change, including setting new rules to limit carbon pollution from power plants, setting new targets to double, again, renewable energy production in our country, and to set new efficiency standards for consumer products. But as we take these steps and other important steps to reduce carbon pollution, we have to improve our ability to manage the effects of climate change that are already being felt in the United States and across the globe. So disasters like Hurricane Sandy, which hit the U.S. East Coast a year ago, it cost communities along the East Coast and cost the U.S. economy tens of billions of dollars, not to mention the loss of lives and property. We have to, I think disasters like Hurricane Sandy reinforce the importance of making smart investments to improve resilience and to protect our families, our businesses, and our communities from extreme weather and other impacts of climate change. In the Climate Action Plan, we've focused on partnering with states and cities and businesses to prepare for these impacts by investing in stronger and safer infrastructure and protecting critical sectors of our economy and our natural resources. For example, we're directing the U.S. government agencies to make sure that any new road, new building, or project that's funded with taxpayer dollars be built to withstand increased flood risks from extreme weather and sea level rise. We're also taking a look at how climate change will affect key sectors so we can be better prepared. For example, the Department of Energy just released a report looking at the U.S. energy sector and what needs to be done to protect our electric grid and make sure we're not plagued by an increasing number of power outages. And we're working to make sure that we have the best data and science on how climate change is going to affect different areas of the country so we can give local decision makers the best information and tools to protect their communities. And this is an area where we are excited at the partnership opportunities with both the public and the private sector in our climate data initiative, which would take large data sets that the U.S. government has and make them available openly for people to use the data to help them make decisions, and also in building a web-based resilience toolkit and try to help decision makers, whether they're in the local government or in the private sector, access information that will help them make the best decisions about building resilience into their operations. And this work that we're undertaking is similar to work that's happening across the private sector. Increasingly, businesses across a variety of sectors are recognizing the importance of climate risk to their own operations and their bottom line. So issues like availability of water, the reliability of products, and the impacts of catastrophic weather events are factoring into businesses' long-term plans and risk assessments. And businesses clearly are very reliant on the communities around them. Even if they're resilient enough to operate after a natural disaster or extreme weather event, they need their customers and their employees to be as well. And in the U.S., certainly the private sector has a very important role to play in ensuring the safety and security of our infrastructure, from energy to water to communications. In fact, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security estimates that about 85% of America's critical infrastructure is owned or operated by the private sector. So this is clearly something that none of us can do alone. Resilience demands action across the board, from the federal government, state and local governments, to communities, and certainly the private sector. So it's really great to have this conversation here today and to hear directly from U.S. businesses on things they're doing to be more resilient. So I'm very glad to have this opportunity to talk to all of you, and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair Sutley. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel and our moderator, and we thank the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES, very much for organizing this event. Moderating this event will be Tim Giuliani, who is the Director of Corporate Engagement at C2ES, and then we'll hear from panelists Giles Dixon from Alstom, Vice President of Policy and Advocacy, and also Jennifer Lakey from Johnson Controls, and she is the Director of the Institute for Building Efficiency. So we're very happy to have all of them today and to hear the private sector perspective. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you, Chair Sutley, and all the folks here at the U.S. Center for making this possible. We are the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, or C2ES. We used to be the Pew Center on Global Climate Change, or you could refer to us as the center formerly known as Pew. Our name has changed, but the core objective remains very much the same, which is advancing practical and effective solutions to our climate and energy challenges. I direct our Business Environmental Leadership Council, which is a multi-sectoral advisory group of 34 Fortune 500 companies with a combined $2 trillion in revenue and 3.5 million employees. Both Alstom and Johnson Controls are members of our Business Council. Now, we of course strongly believe that business has a key role to play in climate mitigation, but by becoming more energy efficient, by developing new technologies, and investing in a low carbon future. But today we're going to discuss the challenges that businesses face in coping with impacts that can't be avoided. Companies have always had to navigate a changing business environment, but of course now they also face a changing physical environment as climate change leads to more frequent and intense heat waves, higher sea levels, droughts, wildflowers, not wildflowers. Wildflowers are fine. I like more wildflowers. Wildfires, however, kill wildflowers, and that's bad, and downpours. For some businesses, these climate impacts are beginning to impose real costs. They damage facilities, interrupt power and water supplies, drive up insurance costs, and disrupt supply and distribution chains. So we wanted to know how companies perceive their climate-related risks and what steps they're taking, what best practices in business resilience are emerging and what's standing in the way. The resulting report, Weathering the Storm, Building Business Resilience to Climate Change, looked in depth at the state of resilience planning amongst a cross-section of global companies based on interviews, workshops, and a comprehensive review of public disclosures by the S&P Global 100 companies. The report also has a detailed case study of 6 companies: American Water, Bayer, the Hartford Group, which is a large insurance company, National Grid, which is a UK-based utility that also has operations in the United States, Rio Tinto, the mining giant, and Weyerhaeuser, which is a US-based forestry company. In a few minutes, I'll ask Jennifer Lakey and Giles to give their opinions, but first I'd like to take a few minutes and walk through the report's key findings. I'll also note that I believe there are copies of the infographic that's based on the report on the table in the back. So, as Chair Sutley said, we are experiencing the consequences of climate change here and now. It's playing a role in increasingly costly and disruptive weather events, and last year more than 800 major weather-related disasters worldwide led to over $130 billion in losses, with the most costly events being Hurricane Sandy and the Midwest drought occurring in the United States. Our report finds that nearly all of the S&P Global 100 companies, 90% of them, identify extreme weather and climate change as current or future business risks. In fact, nearly 40% say they've already experienced these impacts. While climate change is often characterized as a multi-generational problem, its impacts are being felt here and now, which is moving up the time frame of concern for business. Many companies are asking themselves whether they've entered a new normal and which steps they should take and when to build resilience to these risks. And you can see the results of our 38% experience impacts now and 17% within 5 years. Companies are concerned about direct impacts such as extreme weather damaging facilities or disrupting power, and also indirect impacts such as higher prices for commodities or insurance. They also worry about risks they can't directly manage, but that can significantly affect the bottom line. Extreme weather can keep employees from work, can disrupt transportation and communication systems, and threaten the availability of energy, water, or raw materials. And companies are learning firsthand that even when their own risk assessments take climate change into account, their operations can still be disrupted if their suppliers have not taken similar steps. For example, the devastating 2011 floods in Thailand badly damaged both global automotive and electronic supply chains. So how are companies beginning to respond to the risks of more frequent and intense extreme weather? Most are managing them through existing business continuity and emergency management plans, which is a natural first step. Companies have been doing this for generations. But only a few companies have said that they've used climate-specific forecasting tools to comprehensively assess how these risks are evolving and the potential business impacts. These are generally companies very dependent on a key commodity or with operations in high-risk locations. So while the vast majority of companies acknowledge risks from extreme weather and climate change, their actions so far to address those risks aren't really getting much beyond business as usual. A key reason for this, which we'll talk about more later, is the lack of localized data and models that link projected climate changes to impacts germane to company operations. While many climate models are very large scale, companies tend to be concerned about local facilities. So a few leading companies are taking additional steps to build greater resilience, and they see a business case to do so, where they see opportunities to become more efficient or reduce costs or provide greater value to customers. Generally speaking, these companies follow a four-step process. Step one is to build a common understanding across the company of the risks associated with extreme weather and climate change, based not on the past, but on what the change could be in the future. So much of our company's risk evaluation, particularly when it comes to weather, is based on past records. And as we know, the future is going to be quite different. Step two is risk assessment, determining how changes in the likelihood or magnitude of extreme weather events could affect a company's supplies, operations, facilities, employees, customers, and costs. Step three is to outline strategies to manage these risks and pursue potential opportunities. Companies need to prioritize and integrate these measures, some of which may never have been considered before. And finally, step four is to incorporate risks into ongoing risk management activities and update them as new information becomes available. By and large, however, the business response seems so far to be a continuation of existing practices based on a historical picture of past risks. And it's not a complete picture because climate change is rewriting the future. Which brings us to the final piece of our report, the obstacles to increasing business resilience and what can be done. What companies tell us they need is information, and very good to hear what Chair Sutley was saying earlier, because they need a centralized go-to clearinghouse for reliable, up-to-date data and analytical tools. They need user-friendly, localized projections of climate change and models that link these projections to business impacts. They also need governments to invest in strengthening the resilience of public infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and ports. They need, in companies in regulated sectors such as water, electricity, and insurance, tell us they also need regulators to be open to companies making the case for increased spending on resilience and for policies that encourage customer decisions about the sufficient levels of risk mitigation. Finally, the report recommends voluntary public-private partnerships to bring together government and business expertise to develop and improve resilience planning. In many ways, building resilience is doing what companies have always done: strategic planning, risk assessment, investing in infrastructure, diversifying the supply chain, and safeguarding employees using the best information available. Leading companies are preparing to capture the competitive advantages that come from expanding these risk management practices to include the very real and very serious risks that accompany climate change. While we can't be sure about all the ways climate change will manifest over the coming years, smart companies are recognizing that waiting to act can be a costly response. So with that brief overview, let's turn to a couple of the smart companies. And we'll start with Jennifer.
If this is all right, try there again. All right, sorry for the technical difficulties all the way around. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Chair Sutley, and it's delightful to be here today. Thank you, Ashley, for the introductions. I'm Jennifer Lakey. I'm with the Johnson Controls Institute for Building Efficiency, and one of the reasons why I was really pleased to ask to join the panel today is because for us, this is about protecting the people that work in buildings, and that's most of us. Whether you're in a manufacturing environment, in an office building, or in your home, we live, we work, we play in buildings, and we are vulnerable to the changes in extreme weather and the types of electrical outages and other types of infrastructure failures for a significant amount of our livelihoods. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is how resilience and energy efficiency are connected in the built environment, and some of the ways that we think we can move beyond business as usual today to support what we're calling the new green building movement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those elements that we see as the new green. For those of you who don't know Johnson Controls, we're a 125-year-old company. We operate in both the automotive supply industries and in the building efficiency business. We have 150,000 employees around the world, and the building efficiency business has 60,000 employees. So wherever you're located, we are located with our products and services. So if I can get this to work, there we go. Let me tell you about our green framework. First of all, we believe that the buildings of the future that are going to be resilient to climate impacts are going to be those that are grid responsive, have built-in resilience in the infrastructure, are efficient buildings, energy positive buildings, meaning they are both connected to systems that are generating electricity as well as consuming them, and those that are networked, smart buildings, if you will. So what does that mean in practice, and how does this play out? And I'm going to be using some data and statistics from our energy efficiency indicator, which our Institute for Building Efficiency manages on a global basis. The data that I'll be sharing with you is how these components, these elements, are being pursued in the United States context. The data that I'm making available is also available on our website for other countries where the survey was conducted, 10 countries with 3,000 respondents, all of them managers and executives making decisions for their buildings. So, grid responsive. Let me tell you a little bit about what this looks like. In the United States, 15% of organizations today are signed up for some type of demand response capability with their buildings. That allows the utility in the building to interface in real time when there are challenges on the grid, where we have perhaps renewable energy cycling off in terms of what it's providing power to the grid. A building can cycle its energy use down. So there's a way that we can create this dynamic grid interactive building response to allow for better smoothing of the fluctuations on the grid and better performance and reliability overall. Secondly, the topic specifically of resilience. In Superstorm Sandy and in Hurricane Katrina, we saw that there were significant implications of the infrastructure investments that we've made in the past. So that's things like, where do we put the mechanical and electrical systems in the buildings? We put them in the basements. When you have flooding, you're going to lose your critical functions for your building. If you don't change the way you consider your infrastructure and think about that infrastructure in the built environment, you are putting your building and your people at risk. So we have 6 recommendations here around the resilience of the buildings, and that's including things, and I won't go through all of them, but things like allowing for the emergency backup systems to be connected to backup power that is maintained, that has fuel supply, or that's in a renewable resource that has a secure disconnect from the grid. We saw that some of the solar PV systems in the northeast of the United States were taken down despite the fact that they could still produce power because there was not a disconnect that allowed them to operate safely. So when the grid went down, the PV systems went down as well. Those are the infrastructure changes and challenges that we can address specifically to make buildings more resilient and allow them to meet our local needs even in times of crisis. In terms of the number of organizations that are pursuing resilience strategies, we asked questions this year in our survey, and 51% of the executives said they were installing distributed generation with a reliable source of fuel as a response to some of the challenges we've seen to date. And 39% said they plan to install solar panels with a secure grid disconnect. So clearly the impact on the building decision makers in the United States context has changed dramatically over the course of the last few years. Because when you look at some of the efficiency technologies that we've sold and we provide on an ongoing basis to our customers, many of those technologies were not the technologies that they've been installing historically. So if you look at this chart, which shows which of the energy efficiency measures the organizations are pursuing, the top of the list are lighting upgrades. Every year, the top of the list is lighting upgrades. Lighting upgrades provide tremendous efficiency opportunities. HVAC and controls improvements, similarly. However, if you start to think about what do we need to do to make buildings more resilient, you're going to look at some of the things that we've already talked about. How do I think about my distributed generation on site? How do I think about the smart building capabilities that allow me to interact and engage with the grid on terms that are going to provide that independence if I need it? Those kinds of strategies have not yet penetrated the technology purchasing patterns in most of the building owners to date. We think there's a shift coming. The shift is encompassed in a trend that's net zero energy, and some of you are maybe familiar with this. The US government has pursued it for military installations and bases in the United States. I know that Europe has regulations associated with new builds in the future for government buildings and others. And we've seen examples of this, like our National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado, as well as others. In this instance, you're building your entire system to be able to be net zero energy. Again, building for resilience within that system. 46% of US decision makers intend to achieve, at least in one building, a net zero opportunity. And finally, networked. This is a critical component of a resilient, smart, efficient, green building in our new terminology, because in fact the data and the ability to manage, monitor, and engage with your building systems at any point is critical. And that requires an information technology infrastructure. It requires that you have data in real time. This is a picture of the Empire State Building in New York City, where we've performed a comprehensive upgrade for that building. And in the case of this building, not only do we have information about the building systems as a whole, we have information that we're providing to the tenants specifically on what's happening within their space so they can make decisions. Again, the idea of building out the green system of the future has caught on, and smart buildings is the second most popular vision of what will increase in terms of the market penetration of these new technologies over the next decade, according to the respondents of this year's survey. So for more information on the survey, on the green concept, this new model for thinking through the grid-connected, efficient, energy-positive, resilient, and networked building, you can visit our website, or you can see greenbiz.com, where we just published a blog last week in honor of the Green Build Conference in Philadelphia that the U.S. Green Building Council is putting on this week. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Giles.
Thank you very much, Tim, and congratulations to you and all of you at C2ES for organizing this very important discussion. Congratulations on your report. We know that these are increasingly important issues. In many ways, adaptation is quite a leveler for us all in the climate space. Perhaps this is subconscious, but maybe when we think of mitigation, we know it's a big challenge in the developed world, and we kind of think it's an even bigger challenge in developing countries. But the challenges posed by adaptation affect us all perhaps equally, and maybe they affect some developed countries even more than certain other regions of the world. We know what happened last year with the Millstone nuclear power plant. Seawater got too warm, so there was no available cooling water to cool the reactor at the levels required under the license for that particular plant, so the reactor was closed down. We've also seen the recent DOE report that says that simply a 1 degree Celsius increase in average temperatures would result in the total US energy system at constant capacity at the summer peak delivering 19% less electricity. That would be the impact of just 1 degree Celsius temperature rise. Now, my company, Alstom, we produce equipment and technology for power generation and power transmission. Resilience of the equipment that we are selling to our customers, whether they are generators, generating electricity, or transmission system operators operating the transmission networks, resilience is increasingly important for them. They are increasingly asking us to factor it into the design of the products that we sell to them. It's actually quite different how we factor this into generation to how we factor it in to transmission. For the transmission networks, the problem is mainly the extreme weather events. For the generation systems, yes, extreme weather events are a problem, but there's another problem as well, which is simply having a higher average, having a higher peak, having a lower trough, and having more frequent peaks and more frequent troughs. So it's slightly different on the generation side to how it is on the transmission side. Let me talk you through some of the problems we're facing, first of all. We produce steam turbines for power generating utilities, both for coal and nuclear generation. It's well known that higher ambient air quality decreases the average efficiency of a steam turbine. The problems for gas turbines as well, but they're greater for steam turbines. It's well known also that, of course, for coal-fired power plants, for nuclear power plants, the availability of water is a key issue. But it's not just about the thermal generation capacity, it's also the renewables. Here, of course, there's a slight irony in that the very factors we're relying on to generate electricity, wind, heat, water flows, are the same factors that are now going to be occurring in greater extremes, and that diminishes the efficiency of renewable electricity generating equipment. We've probably already passed the high water mark of the efficiency of wind turbines globally. Yeah. So, I don't want to be doom and gloom. There are lots of solutions out there. You want to hear what the solutions are, Tim. And I'm going to talk about some of the solutions that we are factoring into our products now, into our commercial offering to try and combat these problems. Let's look first of all at thermal power plants. Water, I have mentioned. Increasingly, we are saying to our customers, have you thought about dry cooling rather than water cooling? We're currently installing in just two power plants that between them have the capacity of 9.6 gigawatts, complete 100% dry cooling systems. These are the Kusile and Medupi power plants that we're building for Eskom in South Africa. Stress, this is South Africa that's introducing dry cooling. These will be the largest power plants with dry cooling in the world. Dry cooling helps in water-stressed areas. Of course, it's not a panacea because there is a slight energy penalty. More electricity has to be generated at the plant to operate the dry cooling equipment. But still, it helps with water. Of course, seawater cooling we've been using for many years. Increasingly, we are recycling and recirculating the water that's used for cooling and other processes in the power plants. And we're actually getting to the level now where a lot of steam-fired power plants will have zero discharge of wastewater. You might ask yourself the question, we've asked ourselves the question also, well, why have we only waited for climate change in order to do this? We could have been introducing these technologies many years ago and reducing the water footprint of thermal power plants, but we are where we are. We're also at the same time working on our steam turbines to improve their performance in higher average ambient air situations. That's on the thermal side. Let's look at the renewables side. First of all, hydro turbines. Increasingly, we are trying to make them more abrasion resistant so that they can accommodate fluctuating water flows in rivers and dams. Wind is particularly interesting here. When we build wind turbines now, they have heaters on them, we have advanced lubricants, advanced bearings that make them more climate resilient. We're also putting a lot of work into turbine braking systems on most of our turbines now. Our wind turbines, each blade has an autonomous power supply to ensure safe braking in the event of extreme winds. We're now in the process of installing in the North Sea off the coast of Belgium what will be the world's largest offshore wind turbine, slightly larger than 6 megawatts. This will operate at temperatures ranging from minus 30 degrees Celsius to plus 50 degrees Celsius, extremely climate resilient. There's a slight irony in this. I say we're in the process of installing. In fact, we were going to install it earlier in the year, and we had the ship all booked. As you may know, it's not easy to get a ship to take your blades and turbines out to these offshore wind turbines. There's a bit of a bottleneck in the shipping industry, but we had the ship booked, and lo and behold, the irony was, of course, there was a storm the week that we had the ship booked, so we had to delay the installation of the turbine, but we've now got the ship again, and we're in the process of installing the turbine in the North Sea. That's the picture on generation. Let's look at the transmission system. As I say here, the main challenge is extreme weather events, the winds, the storms, the floods that knock down the pylons, the lines, affect the operation of the substations, and so on. Here, there's some really good technology, and this relies on power electronics, first of all, and a lot of IT, including advanced sensors. And what we're trying to do here is improve the data flows, crucially, so that we can have predictive maintenance. Okay? So this is about improving the data flows to and from the transmission equipment in remote locations, so that we have remote monitoring and predictive maintenance. You combine that with improved data analytics, which is basically just an IT game, and then not only will you know when the extreme weather events are coming and will you be able to adapt the transmission equipment accordingly, you'll also be able to manage the electricity market consequences of that. We all know that increasingly with intermittent renewables, the operation of electricity markets, market balancing, price aggregation has got a whole lot more complicated. Well, the resilience issue makes it even more complicated. So what we're doing with the data analytics is trying to support the dynamic pricing so that we can shift demand in the market immediately after an incident. The technology that we're deploying for this is called Wide Area Monitoring Systems, or WAMS as it's known in the trade. This gives you sub-second snapshots of the operational status of the transmission network. So on the technology side, there's a lot happening. We're reasonably confident that we're going to be able to meet most of the challenges that resilience poses. Now, we're beginning to think, we're a company like yours, Jennifer, that likes to come to a COP and talk to governments not only about our technology offering, but also about policy. And we like to make recommendations. And we've been thinking in recent months, well, what should we be saying to governments about policy to improve the resilience of power systems? We're saying to governments now, look, why don't you incentivize investments in more climate resilient areas, both on generation and transmission? Can you put some market signals in place that will reduce risk in the energy system? Can you encourage banks to ensure that they are building some resilience conditionality into their finance policies? And above all, can you please tackle interconnections between different electricity markets? Now, we've been talking about interconnections for many years, simply to improve market balancing, to help with the integration of renewables in electricity markets. Resilience, again, makes this even more important. So in the European Union, this means interconnections between the 28 member states. In the US, of course, it means interconnections between the different transmission market systems. That's about it, ladies and gentlemen. As I say, there are some real challenges, but there's some good news with the technology. The next challenge is to work out how to get the right policy responses to incentivize investments in this technology that we hope is going to solve the problem.
Great. Well, thank you to you both. Neither of you mentioned wildflowers. So obviously this is an area of possible future research, and Chair Sutley, I hope you've taken note of that. Green roofs, yes. So I'd like to, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to get a couple of questions from the audience if there are some. But before we get to that, I wanted to do a quick follow-up, which was to ask, you both talked a lot about solutions and customers, but how have you been looking at resilience and adaptation internally? What is the process that you all have been dealing with?
I'll start us off. So Johnson Controls has, and Tim, I would say your framework for how to think through the strategic questions associated with resilience in business operations is really useful, and something that we're certainly taking note of in the follow-up to the report. Right now, within Johnson Controls, we have an existing risk management approach that goes out every year to our businesses and says, of these 100 or so risk factors, please give us your perception of both the strategic importance of that risk and the likelihood that risk is going to impact the business. And so what we're doing in using this risk navigator is allowing us to map over time how some of these issues are playing out. And I will say that certainly climate is involved in many of the risks that we're measuring for our business. So that can range from things like, security of supply for critical components. That can look at specifically the transportation infrastructure. So although there are only a few of those factors that are specifically climate targeted, many of the risks that one would identify as being affected by the climate changes that we're seeing are going to go up over time, and we're looking to see year over year where those risks are heading. And I'll say that I think that we're seeing some interesting early results. It is early for us. And then the second aspect of this is really around, as an automobile supplier, we certainly felt firsthand the implications of the Thailand floods, of the issues with the nuclear facility in Japan as it pertains to the availability for shipping, the availability for our supply chain to operate efficiently and effectively. And that does get back to business strategy around procurement, around transportation, and those types of efforts. We've focused with our supply chain, I would hazard to say, more on the improvements that they can make in efficiency on the mitigation side than we have yet reached out to them to talk through the resilience angle of our joint partnership around delivering products and services to the market. But I do think that that's an area where we would like to pursue more activities in the future in our manufacturing.
Our own operations, Tim, comprise lots of fairly high-tech factories making high-tech equipment, or R&D centers. They are not difficult to safeguard from a resilience point of view. Yeah? The bigger challenge for us is transporting our equipment to our customers. So we will routinely put a gas turbine that's worth in excess of, $100 million or more, much more, on the back of a truck and transport it. That truck crosses bridges. Yeah. We have a factory in Chattanooga in Tennessee making gas turbines and steam turbines for nuclear plants. It's on the Tennessee River. It's strategically located because from that factory we can transport turbines, generators and other equipment to 70% of all of the nuclear power plants in the US. But that relies, of course, on the flows of water in the US river system. I think it's fair to say, by way of conclusion, we have spent much more time thinking about resilience for our customers and how we can adapt the product offering accordingly than we have about, in particular, what it means for how we get our own equipment that we're producing to our customers.
Are there questions at all out in the audience?
And also our online audience, if you have questions, just Twitter us at #AskUSCenter. Any questions?
Hi, Magnus Benzi from the Stockholm Environment Institute. I've worked on private sector resilience for a little while, and lots of familiar messages and good examples from the talk. I just wanted, maybe Jennifer, if you could reflect on the Thailand floods again. Just what particular lessons did you draw from that? And focusing on supply chain risks, it's a different kind of risk to assess for a company. And if there are any implications on how you're going to work with your supply chain, or any lessons on how you identify and prioritize or assess supply risks in particular.
Right. So a couple of things, and I am not the person who manages in the automobile sector for our company. I'm in with the building efficiency group. But a couple of things really resonated in the messages that I've heard out of the business. And the first really is, the risk mapping. So what did we know about where we were vulnerable in terms of when we had exclusive contracts, where there were issues associated with we've all been operating in a just-in-time delivery system. How does that impact what we do, and should we be thinking about changing or thinking through the approach that we take to just-in-time? Although it is a concept that we absolutely endorse, there may be need for some type of an alternative strategy should something like that occur. The other piece of this that I would just say is that we believe that the resilience requires, and frankly long-term, the mitigation efforts will require a very different type of ecosystem for commerce, and that some of the strategies that have been used will need to reflect a different kind of an ecosystem over time. And that's, I think, probably our main learning was that overall too close of a relationship with one supplier can be a challenge, and that the ecosystem of commerce has to be modified in order to allow us an alternative transportation route, for example, just to get at the resources that we've already contracted for.
Yeah, I'll just a quick follow-up on that. An example from the report, Toyota felt like they had sited their factories in Thailand quite well, and they weren't affected by the floods. However, their suppliers within Thailand were, and so that ended up halting production in Japan. So even if you, as a producer, have gotten your house in order, if your supply chain is out there and at risk, then you're still very much at risk.
I'm Jenny Cooper from the University of Michigan. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to metrics for evaluation of resilience initiatives. So as we move from sort of resilience and adaptation planning into the realm of implementation, how are each of you sort of going about evaluating your success in that realm?
I'll be honest, I'd love your ideas. I am not aware of any overall framework or metrics that we've put in place across the business to look at those impacts and the strategies and the success or challenges that we're facing. But I would love to follow up with you on that.
Yep, we haven't done this either, but you've given us a very good idea, I think. I could think of various KPIs that we could factor in: downtime of equipment, revenue lost by our customers, both in the generation and transmission areas. Thank you for that. Maybe let's discuss afterwards, if you've got any bright ideas, indeed.
I think that's something that you see reflected. That you see reflected in the report, which is that this is a very nascent area. So a lot of companies are just getting into this. That we're only really looking at emerging best practices, not a set of very established best practices. Climate change, particularly in the United States, is still a discussion that some people aren't interested in having, and educating within the company can often be a challenge. You know, if the CEO is engaged, great, because that permeates the company. If it's more of a grassroots or grass tops within a company, sometimes there's a clay layer between the lower management and the upper management. So educating boards, educating C-suite is part of the process, and it's at that point that I think that you'll start to move towards getting more metrics.
Good. I saw another question. We got one back there, and did I see one up here? Okay. Maybe we should take both of those together, if it's okay with you. Okay.
Hi, Steve Winkleman from the Center for Clean Air Policy. I apologize, I walked in late and just stumbled upon this. I'm very pleased to hear it. I'm curious, we have a new effort called Connecting the Dots, looking at how to get the most for your climate dollar, both adaptation and mitigation benefits, and specifically on the issue in both of your sectors about how you see microgrids, combined heat and power as urban solutions. And I apologize if you already spoke to that, but it's one that I think that has both resilience, mitigation, and adaptation benefits.
Okay, and let's take one more question.
Hello, my name is Michael Green. I'm here from Climate Action Liaison Coalition, coalition of small businesses in New England that are looking to take targeted action on climate change. Now, when we have the great intentions of talking about the private sector and climate change, we usually focus on the global 1,000, if you will, and what they're doing to prepare for climate adaptation or resilience. Now, they have the ability to source products and materials from other places, move capital, but that's not true for the backbone of many businesses here in America. Most people get most of their business from within 2 miles. They can't just relocate like a lot of our bigger corporations can. So how do we get them engaged in this conversation, and how do we have them take the same steps to prepare that many of these big businesses are? Thank you.
So first, to the question of microgrids for me, I believe in the framework that I presented, the concept of being able to build out and maintain and secure the opportunities for on-site power is critical to the framework that I believe we ought to be moving for. We already see this in a number of instances, whether it's in campuses or communities or in some of the largest buildings where we supply equipment or manage. And the big questions really are around how significant systems change are we looking at in the U.S. context. Certainly, you know, you have to think that through with implications for how the grid functions today. And I know that a number of utility colleagues would say that, you know, that is an ongoing evolution within the United States. But from the perspective of someone who works on the building side, you know, we believe firmly that combined heat and power, on-site storage, whether that's battery storage or lithium-ion battery storage or some of the other types of opportunities to think through ice storage is another one. There is a real role for on-site generation to be matched with really efficient buildings to deliver a very different type of demand profile. Oh, on the question of local engagement. So we work, our headquarters is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We work very closely with a number of Wisconsin businesses that are located near our facilities, whether that's in Milwaukee or in near our other facilities. We do a lot of local procurement in addition to global procurement. And certainly in our efforts around our sustainability profile, we work very closely with our supply chain. And they can work very closely with the communities where they're located. And our hope is that there can be a much more robust partnership around sustainability, and climate is clearly at the top of the list, as is water consumption for many of them.
Yeah, microgrids, microgeneration, decentralized generation, that's the reality where we're living and increasingly moving to. It probably makes the resilience challenge even greater. I say probably because there are some people who say, well, hold on, the more generation units we have, the more microgrids we have out there, the more we have spread our geographical risk, yeah, the more hedged we are against extreme climate events. But the DOE report that came out, I think, in July this year that I referred to earlier concluded that, in fact, the net impact of decentralized generation was probably negative in terms of increasing the resilience challenge. And I think their conclusion was, look, to be more resilient, you've got to invest quite heavily. Yeah, and that requires a certain economy of scale. That requires a certain critical mass in terms of size of your generating unit, yeah, or size of your transmission unit. And the more spread out that is, the more difficult it's going to be for the greater number of operators you have, both in the generation and transmission systems, to make the necessary investments. But you could see it either ways, but I think on balance it's probably making the challenge even greater.
One more comment on the small medium enterprise issue. I mean, it is a challenge. Many NGOs, especially large national NGOs, focus on larger companies and at the higher level. Part of that is just a bandwidth issue. It's very difficult to get and educate when you get down into the very small businesses. Companies, however, as you say, most of those businesses are part of larger companies' supply chains. So we are starting to see that sort of education happening on the mitigation side, where companies are asking their suppliers to set targets, to have CSR reports, to report some metrics. And so the next step would be to add resilience into that, to ask for suppliers to be producing that sort of information. The challenge, of course, is that that's one more layer of reporting that an already small business that's very strapped and doesn't have the resources has to do. It's that CEO issue is probably less of an issue in a small business if because the CEO is probably might be the only employee at the same time, and the small business often will be exposed to risk on a much smaller scale. It's very localized, whereas a large company is going to be exposed to climate and weather risks potentially across a huge geographical area, and that individual and small business might have actually a better understanding of their own risk, in terms of what they've experienced over the years. The challenge is going to be getting them the information about what the future changes might be, and that can also be a role for government.
Any final remarks before we close? How about a round of applause for our moderator and panelists? Thank you to all of you for presenting this very interesting information to us and showing us the business perspective. And thanks to all of you for coming and engaging in this event. It looks like we might have an announcement. Okay, everyone is invited to a reception that's beginning. I think we do need a little room for setup, if I'm right, so you might exit for a little while and come back. And also, I just want to alert you to some of our events tomorrow at 11 a.m. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy will have an event on managing climate risks in a changing energy landscape. So we'll hear some more private sector perspectives, but focused in on the energy side specifically. And then at 1:30 p.m., Chair Sutley will join us again for an event by the Council on Environmental Quality and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on approaches for preparedness, rebuilding, and resilience. And we'll talk very specifically about lessons from Hurricane Sandy and the results of the Sandy Task Force. So hope to see you then, and thanks for being with us tonight.